Welcome to City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. This week, it's a look at the biggest stories of 2025 and their impact on you, now and in years to come. The votes are in, and there's a new slate of lawmakers eager for change in Seattle and King County.
That is the spirit that I intend to bring into the mayor's office.
But how much can new local leadership accomplish in 2026? With an unsettled economy and a budget deficit already forecast for 2027.
We've put money aside. It's not enough.
Plus, how will Seattle's approach to public safety change with a new multi-million-dollar contract for Seattle police and an expanded 911 alternative system?
That is the game changer, right? If we can get treatment to people.
And what's next for our region's homelessness response, with King County's Housing First approach at risk of losing $25 to $40 million in federal funding.
This is flat-out hatred, cruelty that's been codified.
We're previewing what's next in local politics by looking back at a tumultuous 2025.
You saw Bruce Harrell, move kind of progressive as the election neared.
Our panel of local journalists weighs in.
I think Katie Wilson and her team was really savvy.
She retained Sean Barnes as police chief. I think that was a huge decision.
You get the scoop on the year's biggest headlines, next on City Inside Out. And here they are, a panel of journalists to help us talk about the biggest stories of the year. And that panel would include Erica C. Barnett, publisher and editor of Publicola. Erica, good to see you again.
Good to be here.
We also have with us Greg Kim, a reporter from the Seattle Times who focuses on homelessness. Greg, great to have you here too.
Thanks for having me.
And finally, we have Nate Sanford, a reporter for KNKX and Cascade PBS. Thank you for joining us, Nate.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, Erica, let me start with you. I want to talk about the biggest story of the year. I think a lot of people would say a sea change in local politics. We've got two new members of the Seattle City Council. We've got a new city attorney, a new mayor, and a new King County executive after 15 plus years of Dow Constantine. For the most part, if you were an incumbent, you were voted out. How did you interpret the story of this year's fall elections?
Well, I think that the 2023 elections were sort of a continuation of 2021, a more conservative turn in local politics. And I think that this is, one of our
pendulum swinging back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was going to say ebbs and flows. I think it swung pretty hard this time with Katie Wilson being elected mayor. I certainly did not expect that when she announced she was running earlier this year. And in fact, I remember asking her, are you running to win? Which seems silly now, but was a natural question then. So, yeah, big sea change towards the left, both in terms of ousting the city attorney, Republican Ann Davison, who was elected in 2021, ousting the mayor. And then, as you mentioned, Dow Constantine has been in there for 16 years.
Yeah.
So that is going to be a hugely disruptive change just because everybody has gotten so used to him. He seems like a fixture that's never going to go away. And now Girmay Zahalai is coming in and shaking things up.
He is still with Sound Transit, so we're definitely going to be talking with him still. Thank you for that. Nate, some thoughts about the election results here? This was a major sweep for these progressive candidates.
Yeah, definitely. And like Erica said, also I think Katie Wilson really surprised a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people really expected it would go this way at the beginning. And I think, in addition to being kind of a sea change, it's also feels like kind of a generational change as well, right? I think Katie Wilson is possibly our first millennial mayor, and there's a lot of these progressive candidates who defeated their opponents this year are quite young. It's Alexis Mercedes-Rank obviously is in her 20s.
Yes.
Still, but it's a lot of people with, I think, kind of this newer approach to politics maybe that's
right.
kind of almost, especially in the wake of the presidential election in 2024, which was, I think, unusually geriatric. There's kind of this sense. There's a sense of things maybe shifting a little bit, which is going to be really interesting.
Said the young man at the end of the table. I love it. And it really looked too. I was talking to you about this earlier. There were some social media differences too that I think Katie Wilson brought to fore, which might have had an influence in some way in terms of reaching out to younger voters.
Yeah, I definitely don't think it's the only reason she did well with young people. I think a lot of her message and platform probably spoke to that as well. But I think this is a trend we've seen in politics for a while of candidates really learning that you have to embrace social media, you have to embrace video and short form video, and really try to meet people where they're at, where they're getting the information, which is on a lot of these platforms. And I think Katie Wilson and her team was really savvy about doing that. They had several videos go viral. There was the pizza video, right, and some stuff like
I
that.
shop at Goodwill,
which I think kind of communicated a sort of relatability that I think Bruce Harrell maybe struggled to get across in his messaging, right, and kind of I think he maybe just wasn't as familiar with maybe the vocabulary of those platforms and the way that sort of candidates have to increasingly be everywhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely true. Thank you for that. Greg, I wanted your take on this, and I wanted to ask this because it seemed like housing affordability and, to an extent, homelessness really seemed to take over as top issues this fall on the minds of voters. Katie Wilson launched her campaign for mayor on the tails of a successful push for social housing funding. She's calling for 4,000 new units of emergency housing. I know you talked to both candidates for King County Executive about their homeless plans, too. Did you see that issue of housing and homelessness shape this fall election in some ways? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's been a top issue for Seattle and King County for going on a decade at least, right? And so it's not necessarily new. I think, one thing to mention is that Seattle's politics doesn't exist in isolation, right? We have to frame it in the national context. Trump and the reaction to Trump was impacting races up and down the ballot, right? So that's something to remember. One other thing that struck me about the top card on the ballot with the Seattle mayor's race was that it was a classic, progressive versus moderate candidate, but it compared to some previous elections, they weren't as far apart in those polls as they might have been maybe 4 years ago. You saw Bruce Harrell, move kind of progressive as the election neared, and you also saw Katie Wilson, the progressive candidate. After she won, she's brought on a lot of people who have experience in city government. She would not say that she wouldn't sweep or remove encampments, right? That was a big differentiator between previous moderate or progressive candidates in the past. But of course, homelessness remains a big concern. And I think, I think Katie Wilson probably read that the public isn't quite ready to swing all the way back that way. People still have the pandemic in mind when street disorder, street-level homelessness increased significantly. And so that's probably a read that she was making in her race as well.
Yeah, I think so too. Let me start with you, Nate, and I'll go down the line here. I wanted to talk about the city budget process, which just wrapped up a few weeks ago. There was plenty of tax talk. The city will have a new 0.1% sales tax increase. The council is redirecting revenue from the Jumpstart payroll expense tax, and voters chose to restructure our business and occupation tax system too with Seattle Shield. Those taxes did help balance the budget, but the city's still looking at this $140 million some odd dollar hole coming ahead in 2027 here. I just see this as a very big challenge for the Wilson administration. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a lot that she's going to have to deal with in her first year. I think, and during her shortly after she was elected in her victory speech, she acknowledged that she's obviously been vocal about new progressive revenue sources and new taxes, but the extent to which that can fill the entire hole is kind of unclear. And I think, she said there might have to be some cuts in some areas, right, and some tough choices. But I definitely think we'll see a lot of talk about both in the coming year.
Yeah, fair enough. Greg, I'll go down the line here. I wanted to point out that the City Council set up a proviso in the budget to restrict $30 million that's actually set aside for the Unified Care Team. This is the city's homelessness response effort set in motion by outgoing Mayor Bruce Harrell. Do you see that measure as a roadblock for Mayor-elect Wilson when it comes to her approach to homelessness? Some thoughts?
That's an interesting question. You could definitely see that as a defense by the outgoing Mayor Harrell and some of the council members too, against what they see as a progressive mayor coming in and potentially maybe not wanting to have such a heavy hand in enforcement for street-level homelessness. And it remains to be seen. She could take that and remain within the bounds of that proviso and still change her approach, as she has indicated she will. You could turn that into more outreach rather than completely removing encampments. But it will be, that is definitely one of the main things I'm interested in seeing in Mayor Wilson's tenure of like whether she does a 180 with Mayor Harrell's approach to removing homeless encampments, or if she takes a less sharp of a turn.
Do you think she's going to be able to get these 4,000 emergency housing units she's been asking for on the campaign trail? At least there are so many candidates, as you know, in years past who have made big promises when it comes to that type of thing with shelter space. How real is that campaign promise? What do you think?
Yeah, well, she's outlined how she plans to get those 4,000 units, and it's a really big, kind of crazy idea.
Okay.
So I'll start with, she said that she wants, 900 or 1,000 tiny home units. That's unrealistic. That's not going to happen, I would say.
Why do you say that?
There's just not the space for that. Tiny home villages stay on, generally temporary land. I mean, you need the space for it. And it's been very, very challenging for them to even add 1 or 2 tiny home villages of like 100 units.
Yes.
To say that we're going to find the space for 1,000, I think she's going to run into some serious challenges just with finding the space.
Okay. All right.
The other 3,000 are really, really interesting.
Yeah.
What she's planning to do is take unoccupied units
Yes.
in affordable housing,
Right.
meant for people who are low income but not necessarily homeless, right?
Right.
So this is just your normal apartment unit where the rents are a little bit cheaper than market rate.
Yes.
They don't have caseworkers in them right now. They don't have the mental health or physical health professionals in them that often, accompany housing for homeless individuals.
Right.
And she's talking about rededicating funds from the city's housing funding to add those staff into those buildings and convert those into emergency housing or permanent housing for homeless people. That's a really, really big idea. It's not impossible, and I'm really curious to see how it works. There are people who say, yeah, that's totally, doable, and there's some people who say that's totally impossible, and I don't really know where that's going to land yet.
And I'm going to come back to homeless funding in just a little bit. But Erica, I wanted to maybe follow on what Nate was talking about when it comes to taxes and what might be coming down the line here. Councilmember Eddie Lynn was talking about a citywide capital gains tax on the campaign trail. He's been talking about it as a council member now, too. Councilmember-elect Foster, same thing. There's this growing progressive bloc in the council we've been talking about. Do you see them making that push for that kind of tax next year? If you could talk about that and the overall fiscal health, I guess, of the city of Seattle, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think they can certainly come back with the capital gains tax proposal. I think what we saw when it was proposed earlier by Kathy Moore and Alexis Mercedes Rink was that it doesn't actually raise that much money. And so it's not going to solve these fiscal problems that I would say Bruce Harrell has set up in the budget, by proposing just tons and tons of new programs. And, we haven't talked about sort of why the budget is so large and why we're in
Go
such
right
a
ahead,
hole.
if you'd like to.
But the main problem is that, the city council and the mayor have just piled on tens of millions, hundreds of millions of programs in the last couple of years that are brand new that have to be funded, on an ongoing basis.
It's kind of coming out of COVID, right? I mean, some of these programs?
Some of them are, and some of them aren't. I mean,
Okay.
surveillance cameras, for example, is a big one that has nothing to do with COVID. I mean, unless you buy into the idea that the city became, inherently more unsafe and that cameras inherently work or are successful at
big questions,
producing public safety, which I think are big questions. But and in an era of Trump, to sort of massively expand surveillance of Seattle residents is, I would say a decision that got questioned, and I would say a questionable decision. But in any case, all this new spending on, the Unified Care Team expanded last year. It's 116 people now. And as you said, I mean, the city council put a proviso on it so that it has to be spent on those people, whether or not they're doing the same things. So, I mean, the city is in, a much bigger problem than a capital gains tax is going to address. And we've already passed a sales tax increase, kind of getting to the point where it's untenable.
It's one of the highest sales taxes in the country.
I think it is the highest, and a B&O tax increase on businesses. So there's
larger businesses, yes.
On larger businesses. So there's not a lot of wiggle room to pass, more and more taxes at the local level. So I think that it is it's going to be a real problem, and there are going to have to be cuts most likely.
I want to talk about some possible cuts. And Greg, let me bring you back in. I want to pull apart this issue of federal funding cuts to local budgets, especially when it comes to homelessness. The Trump administration is not supportive of the housing first approach that's used by the permanent supportive housing in Seattle and King County. This is where services are attached to this housing and where treatment for medical addiction issues, et cetera, comes after a person is stably housed. I know you've reported on this in the Seattle Times. What could these cuts mean to local providers? What are the providers doing about this situation? The city, the county? Talk to me about this.
Yeah, it's the King County receives about $60 to $70 million a year in these funds, and they generally go towards permanent supportive housing or this housing with services for people who've been previously homeless. And that $70 million goes a lot further than it sounds like, because it's kind of the bedrock upon which a huge housing system is built upon and layered upon. There's the $70 million that the federal government provides for operating expenses for this permanent supportive housing, but then city, state, county money is piled on top of that. And so it really impacts the health of the entire, a huge housing system with thousands of units involved and thousands of people who have been previously homeless relying on it. And so right now there's just a logistical challenge by local officials who are not going to accept that system collapsing, of how to fill that money or fight the federal government to get those dollars back. Or make adaptations to try to capture that funding.
Yeah, you've written about this in Publicola, Erica. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add too. I mean, one of the problems with the funding situation is first that they're cutting all this funding for permanent housing, but also there's provisions attached to it. Now they pulled this back as we're recording. The federal government has pulled back the funding application, and we don't know why or when it's going to come back. But I mean, there's stuff on immigration that you have to participate in, cooperate with ICE. There's stuff on gender that you can't acknowledge the existence of transgender,
it's being legally challenged
non-binary
by
people.
King County and a number of other jurisdictions.
Yes.
Keep going.
And and then there's stuff on racial equity. You can't have or ever have had racial preferences. And then drug use. You can't have ever allowed drug use, which is kind of a bedrock of housing first. That you have to get housing before you can get recovery from, addiction and mental illness. So it penalizes basically everything we do here in King County in the most recent form. So, I mean, it is a matter of we have to figure out a way to fill this locally and at the state level, because most of our programs cannot meet these criteria.
Yeah.
But as you and Brian have been talking about, those local governments are super strange with their budget, so it makes it really
They set aside some money, but it doesn't sound like it's enough. Yeah.
And I also want to add, I think it's important to remember, the broader economic context that's creating these, budget strains too, right? As you alluded to, there was increased spending over the last few years during the pandemic, and revenue was increasing during that period. There was the federal pandemic relief funding, of course, but there was also a huge amount of construction, right, which is a lot of where the city brings in its revenue. Interest rates were so low, right? And so there was a bunch of construction happening. These tech companies that we have locally were hiring like crazy during the pandemic. That added to the taxes that they can get from those. And we see both of those major sources of revenue declining right now. Construction has dropped off a cliff. Interest rates are way too high. Building costs are way too high. And so developers are hardly doing that. And then, you see the big tech companies pulling back significantly. And so there are big economic trends that explain why we both increased revenue and increased spending over the last few years. And, these long-term trends that, are big, over the next few years. That's going to be a significant decrease from what we've been seeing over the last few years.
Major impact. Nate, some thoughts about this, federal funding cuts, what they could mean to our region? What do you got?
Yeah, and, like Greg was saying, I think it's definitely, not just a Seattle problem. I think a lot of cities are struggling with this problem right now, with the fact that they received emergency money during the pandemic and used it to fund new programs, and then the money's gone now. And that's, I think, has been one contributor to a lot of issues. But federal cuts to homeless funding could be really, really devastating in a lot of areas. Cities really rely on HUD for a lot of different programs. And I know Mayor-elect Wilson has talked about her desire is to backfill that if it does get cut, right?
Right.
And there's talk about finding ways to have money set aside in the event that it does fully go away, so the city doesn't have to, shut places down, right?
Right.
Put people out on the street, but that's still a lot of money.
It is, yeah, and it's going to be unfolding over these next couple of months here.
Yeah.
Erica, I want to jump back to you and talk about the new collective bargaining agreement the city just struck with SPOG, the police officers union that covers most of the rank-and-file officers of the SPD. The agreement will allow the city, in some cases, to do a direct dispatch with its non-police crisis responders, these care teams, so not a dual dispatch with police. Again, in some situations, the city definitely wanted that. But critics say the city did not get enough in this deal when it comes to officer accountability requirements. What's your assessment on this deal with SPOG, which negotiated a 13% raise, by the way, on top of already being the highest paid cops in the state? What did the city get out of this, do you think?
Well, just to elaborate on that raise, it's a 42% raise over the retroactive life of the contract.
I see.
So
Okay.
through 2027, it's 2024 through 2027.
Okay.
So very significant raises. Police will make $126,000 after 6 months. What did the city get out of it? I mean, they got some, as you mentioned, some changes to the care contract. But in terms of accountability, I would say not a lot. I mean, the major issue about arbitration for misconduct is still in negotiations. They basically reached an impasse and said, we're going to make this separate from the contract. They changed the way that minor discipline can be considered. Now it's going to not go to the Office of Police Accountability, but rather to sergeants. So it'll be handled in-house. That's something that a lot of people have actually advocated for because it lets OPA spend more time on those more serious cases.
Office of Police Accountability, keep going.
But the care team concessions, allowing care to go out, without police on hand and allowing them to expand beyond 24 people, they're pretty modest when you consider that the contract also contains a bunch of new rules. So, for example, if there is drug use present, care can't respond. If it's not literally on the street, if it's inside a building or in a car, care can't respond. They have to have cops there. And so there's just a long list of criteria. If a crime has occurred, if there's evidence a crime has occurred, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of new restrictions that I think CARE was in some ways blindsided by.
Yeah. Nate, are you tracking this? This is an interesting development with public safety. What are your thoughts on what's happening with this new contract and the expansion of CARE, too? That's a big deal for this city.
I think it's significant also that there were, we did see 3 council members voting against this contract, right?
Yeah.
Which, it's, Councilmember Rob Saka as well was had some concerns about it, and
Specific to accountability, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's notable, especially just given how over the past few years, at least, kind of in the wake of the protests in 2020, there has been this push to this really strong push to hire more cops in Seattle, and some, I think, deference in some ways to try to create an attractive environment. And maybe there's a bit more pushback happening now, and I think like the fact that the contract doesn't one accountability measure is the ability to for civilian investigators to subpoena cops, right? That's one thing that's missing that I know is a big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting seeing what the new council's relationship with police is like going forward over the next few years.
Yeah, that was a big vote, kind of a pro forma vote, but it was very important for the council for sure. Greg, I was talking to you about this before. It sounds like CARE, yes, it's expanding, but maybe we haven't seen the full impact of it yet on the homelessness crisis. What do you think about that? I know there's some interaction there, but I just wanted your take on this.
Yeah, I mean, homeless people have a lot of interactions with police, I don't know. I haven't tracked.
We're not there yet.
Enough.
It sounds like.
I don't know whether they've been on the ground enough to have made like a huge impact, but that'll be an interesting question to see going forward, whether they're able to handle more cases.
All right. Well, speaking of going forward, thank you for bringing that up, Greg. It's time to wrap up. I wanted to talk about a headline that maybe we should be looking at in 2026, maybe even something we haven't touched on yet. What are you keeping track of right now?
I think obviously there are some big questions with homelessness in 2026. One's the World Cup, obviously. And
happening in June. We got a few matches here,
Yeah, and I think the outgoing mayor Bruce Harrell's approach of really ramping up encampment removals, it had impacts on other neighborhoods. It's had a lot of negative impacts on the people experiencing homelessness, but it also was pretty effective at moving people out of certain areas in the city, like downtown.
Happened during the All-Star game, too. Yeah,
right.
definitely.
And so, and with the incoming mayor, Wilson, saying that she's going to take a different approach, it'll be interesting to see how she handles the World Cup.
Got it. Nate, some thoughts about something you're keeping an eye on in the new year?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be the biggest story of 2026 or anything, but I'm curious how and if Katie Wilson will move forward with this kind of ambitious, sort of somewhat vague AI plan that Bruce Harrell announced earlier this year. It was kind of this long-in-the-works AI sort of roadmap vision for how the city is going to start using artificial intelligence for all sorts of things. And I think Harrell really seemed to be a big booster of that, and was really excited by that possibility, kind of implementing it in things like 911 and permitting and things like that, right? The city just hired a few days ago a new AI director who's going to kind of oversee Seattle, becoming the AI leader, right, of the country. And I don't know. I'm really curious how Katie Wilson, how and if she's going to want to continue with that vision.
Yeah, interesting thought. Thank you, Nate. Erica, help us close out here. Some final thoughts about a big story that's on your radar for the next year.
Yeah, I think big picture, I'm going to be interested to see how Katie Wilson, maintains or modulates her positions on a lot of things. She retained Sean Barnes as police chief. I think that was a huge decision for her, and she was, reportedly vacillating on it. And so, and I think some of the progressive left was pretty mad. I mean, if Blue Sky is any indication, was pretty mad about that. I think that encampment sweeps are going to be another question, because she said, she will do encampment removals. So I think on all of these really thorny issues that have a lot of constituents, I'm going to be interested to see where she falls, and particularly on police and on homelessness.
Okay, thank you all for this, and we will be right back.
What are people saying online about the biggest headlines of this year? One person writes, "What a disaster this is going to be. A woman with no management experience is now mayor, with her folder full of good intentions, but no way to fund them except with more taxes." Another person says, "This was not a mandate election. Business and society can actually coexist. Public transportation and cars can exist. Labor laws and a profit-driven business can coexist." We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on social media.
Great to have that input, and a big thanks to Nate Sanford, Greg Kim, and Erica C. Barnett. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much.
All right, I'm Brian Callanan. See you next time on City Inside Out.